Stockton, California was a quiet city where families felt safe, yet a birthday party turned into sudden chaos, shocking everyone present. Balloons and laughter filled the room, but the joy vanished instantly when gunshots rang out unexpectedly, sending panic through the house. Guests froze in terror, children cried, and adults frantically searched for cover behind furniture, walls, and doorways to avoid bullets. Parents clutched their children tightly, shielding them as they navigated the hallways and living spaces amid the horrifying gunfire. Children screamed and cried while adults shouted instructions, trying to guide everyone towards safe exits and hidden spots throughout the home. Neighbors reported hearing rapid gunfire, prompting them to lock doors, call 911, and alert nearby residents. Unsure if the danger had passed, dispatchers were overwhelmed with multiple calls from frantic parents and guests, demanding immediate response to the ongoing violent attack. Police arrived swiftly, cordoning off the area, searching the property, and ensuring survivors were protected while carefully documenting evidence. Paramedics rushed to treat the wounded, while officers questioned traumatized witnesses, reconstructing the terrifying sequence of events in detail. By the morning, Stockton realized the tragedy's scale. A child's birthday celebration had turned into a horrifying and unforgettable nightmare. The guests tried to remain calm, but the chaos made every movement dangerous, forcing them to think quickly about survival options. Adults moved strategically, shielding children, while scanning rooms for safe paths, hoping the shooter would not change locations suddenly. Every second felt like an eternity, as the sound of bullets echoed and screams filled the once joyful space, leaving panic in its wake. Furniture was overturned, toys scattered, and personal belongings abandoned, as families prioritized safety over anything else inside the house. Parents whispered directions and reassured terrified children, guiding them toward doors and closets while ignoring the fear that gripped their own hearts. Neighbors gathered at windows and doorways, witnessing the frantic evacuation and calling authorities, unsure if their loved ones were safe indoors. Emergency responders coordinated quickly, arriving with lights flashing and sirens blaring, trying to enter the scene while avoiding any further harm. Officers and medics worked together, triaging victims, calming survivors, and securing the area to prevent additional tragedies. During the chaotic aftermath, friends and family outside the home waited anxiously, calling each other repeatedly, desperate for news about those trapped inside the terrifying scene. By the time the shooting ended, first responders began documenting the harrowing evidence and comforting traumatized witnesses, beginning an intense investigation. Investigators quickly secured the perimeter, ensuring no one could enter or leave while collecting crucial evidence from the chaotic scene. Officers documented every detail meticulously, photographing rooms, bullet trajectories, and personal belongings left abandoned during the frantic escape. Paramedics continued treating the injured inside and outside the home, transporting the most critical victims to nearby hospitals with urgency. Family members tried to comfort each other, holding crying children, while grappling with the sudden horror that had invaded a joyful event. Witnesses described the rapid pace of the attack, noting the shooter's unpredictable movements and the terrifying intensity of the gunfire. Local news stations began reporting the incident, but information remained scarce, and authorities urged caution until full details were confirmed. Social media erupted with messages from friends and relatives, spreading concern, fear, and prayers for those trapped or wounded in the attack. Residents nearby shared accounts of hearing multiple gunshots and screams, amplifying the sense of urgency as law enforcement responded swiftly. Emergency crews coordinated triage areas outside the home, separating the injured by severity while documenting names, injuries, and vital statistics. By the end of the first chaotic hour, Stockton police had stabilized the scene, accounted for survivors, and begun the daunting task of investigation. Detectives began interviewing witnesses one by one, piecing together the sequence of events from multiple terrified perspectives inside the home. Every detail mattered, from the position of furniture to the sounds heard in each room. As investigators tried to reconstruct the attack methodically, officers cross-checked statements for inconsistencies, verifying timelines, and mapping movements to establish a clear understanding of the shooter's path. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses was collected to identify the shooter's approach and potential escape routes used during the attack. Forensic teams examined the bullet casings, trajectories, and entry points, carefully cataloging each piece of evidence for later analysis in the investigation. Victims were comforted as much as possible, and mental health professionals were called to help survivors cope with trauma and shock from the ordeal. Families outside the house continued receiving updates, but the reality of the attack scale made it difficult for anyone to fully grasp what had happened. Emergency hotlines were overwhelmed with concerned citizens, relatives, and friends seeking information about loved ones still inside or recently evacuated. Every officer, medic, and investigator worked tirelessly, knowing that the safety and recovery of the victims depended on swift, precise action. As dawn approached, Stockton faced a community in shock, with a once joyful neighborhood now haunted by fear and the aftermath of violent tragedy. Local authorities called in additional units to ensure that the neighborhood remained secure while forensic teams conducted a thorough investigation. Investigators examined entry points, windows, and doors, determining how the shooter gained access without alerting anyone prior to the attack. Families and friends gathered in nearby safe locations, anxiously waiting for news, struggling to understand how a celebration turned into chaos. Emergency services coordinated with hospitals to track patients' conditions, ensuring that those most critically injured received immediate care. Media coverage highlighted the severity of the incident, but officials continued to withhold specific details to protect the integrity of the investigation. Officers interviewed neighbors, documenting any unusual activity, vehicles, or individuals seen near the residence prior to the tragic event. Mental health counselors provided support to traumatized children, parents, and friends, helping them cope with the shock of the horrific shooting. Investigators collected statements, analyzing patterns of fear, movement, and reactions to better understand how the situation unfolded in real time. Police confirmed that no further threats were present, but community tension remained high as residents processed the sudden violence. While late morning, Stockton had become a city grappling with grief, fear, and questions that demanded answers from local and state authorities. Detectives analyzed physical evidence meticulously, including fingerprints, shell casings, and other trace materials left behind at the crime scene. Officers and forensic experts worked side by side, photographing, measuring, and cataloging every object that could provide clues about the shooter. Community leaders held press briefings, urging residents to remain calm while law enforcement continued gathering information from multiple sources. Investigators reached out to nearby jurisdictions for assistance, ensuring that no lead went unexplored and every possibility was examined. The neighborhood remained on high alert, with volunteers and officials assisting in monitoring the area and supporting affected families. Digital evidence was collected, including social media activity, video recordings, and any communication that could shed light on the shooter's motives. Victims' families received regular updates, but the enormity of the incident made it difficult for anyone to grasp the full scope of the tragedy. Officers continued door-to-door canvassing, seeking any witness or clue that could lead to identification and apprehension of the suspect. Analysts reviewed ballistic reports, comparing recovered evidence with local and national databases to identify possible matches or connections. By the end of the first day, Stockton's community faced the stark reality of the shooting, beginning a long process of recovery and investigation. Overnight, investigators reviewed all collected evidence, prioritizing key leads and evaluating statements from witnesses for inconsistencies or useful details. The city remained tense, with law enforcement maintaining a visible presence to reassure residents and prevent further panic or copycat incidents. Officers coordinated with federal agencies, sharing forensic data, witness reports, and surveillance footage to broaden the scope of the ongoing investigation. Forensic experts processed DNA and ballistic evidence, working late into the night to uncover critical connections that might identify the shooter. Community volunteers assisted in distributing information, guiding affected families, and providing support services to those impacted by the violent event. Authorities continued interviewing anyone present during the incident, reconstructing movements, timing, and responses to understand the sequence of chaos. Investigators examined prior reports of suspicious activity in the neighborhood, cross-referencing them with the day's timeline to identify possible patterns. Mental health counselors offered ongoing support to survivors, children, and witnesses, helping them navigate trauma and anxiety caused by the attack. Law enforcement analyzed digital communications, looking for threats, plans, or messages that might point to the shooter or collaborators. By dawn, a comprehensive picture began forming, but officials reminded the public that the investigation was still in its earliest and most critical stage. Detectives revisited the crime scene during daylight, observing angles, lighting, and potential blind spots that could have aided the shooter's movements. Forensic photographers captured additional images, ensuring every detail was documented for analysis. Courtroom preparation and investigative review. Evidence bags were meticulously labeled, sealed, and catalogued to maintain the integrity of samples that could become critical in solving the case. Police analysts coordinated with local hospitals, tracking patient treatment, injuries, and any patterns that could provide insight into the shooter's actions. Witness statements were transcribed and compared against video surveillance, establishing a timeline that helped reconstruct events with greater accuracy. Community meetings were held to update residents, answer questions, and reinforce the importance of cooperation with law enforcement during the investigation. Officers monitored traffic and pedestrian patterns near the scene, seeking potential witnesses or vehicles that could have been overlooked initially. Specialists in crime scene reconstruction began modeling trajectories, distances, and positions to understand the shooter's strategy and approach. Investigators coordinated with state databases, checking for past criminal records, aliases, or histories that might link individuals to the violent event. By the close of the second day, Stockton's residents grappled with fear, grief, and questions, while investigators continued tirelessly to find answers. Overnight, investigators analyzed phone records, social media activity, and online messages to uncover possible motives or links to the suspect. Officers expanded their search perimeter, reviewing traffic cameras, residential surveillance, and business recordings for unusual movements or vehicles. Forensic teams meticulously examined bullet trajectories, shell casing locations, and points of impact to reconstruct the exact sequence of events. Neighborhood patrols were increased, providing visible reassurance to residents and encouraging anyone with information to come forward immediately. Detectives reviewed past incidents, disputes, and patterns of violence in the area, searching for correlations that might reveal the shooter's identity. Local schools implemented additional safety measures, communicating protocols to students and parents to prevent panic or copycat occurrences. Investigators coordinated with behavioral specialists to evaluate potential motives, profiles, and psychological patterns that might explain the attacker's behavior. Public tips were documented, screened, and verified, ensuring that credible information contributed to the growing pool of investigative leads. Media coverage was carefully monitored, balancing transparency with the need to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. By the early morning, a more detailed understanding of the shooting emerged, though officials warned the public that the case was far from resolved. Detectives conducted interviews with neighbors, party attendees, and nearby residents to identify any overlooked witnesses or suspicious behavior. Forensic teams cross-checked evidence against regional crime databases, looking for similar incidents or known offenders in the vicinity. Law enforcement coordinated with emergency medical teams to confirm victim details, timelines, and the exact circumstances surrounding the shooting. Surveillance footage from local businesses and homes was reviewed frame by frame to trace potential escape routes used by the suspect. Officers identified key locations of interest, including parking areas, entrances, and other points that might provide clues to the shooter's actions. Analysts compiled reports on ballistic evidence, comparing shell casings, firearms type, and trajectories to narrow down possible weapon matches. Community support services expanded rapidly, providing counseling, resources, and emergency guidance to families and friends affected by the tragedy. Digital footprints of party attendees were examined, ensuring no critical information was overlooked regarding threats, communications, or suspicious behavior. Detectives evaluated prior disputes, social media conflicts, and regional incidents that might indicate motives or connections to the shooter. By midday, law enforcement maintained a cautious optimism, aware that critical leads were emerging but that the case required careful, methodical work. Officers coordinated with regional authorities to track any vehicles leaving the area during and after the shooting for potential leads or suspect identification. Investigators revisited witness statements multiple times, comparing details for consistency and seeking small discrepancies that might reveal crucial information. Forensic analysts examined fingerprints, DNA samples, and other trace evidence collected at the scene to identify individuals involved in the attack. Neighborhood canvassing continued, with officers knocking on doors, collecting statements, and asking for any overlooked observations from residents nearby. Local authorities established hotlines and information portals for residents, encouraging tips, photos, and videos to assist the ongoing investigation. Surveillance from neighboring streets, public buildings, and private cameras was synchronized to reconstruct a timeline of the shooter's movements accurately. Detectives analyzed the party logistics, including entry points, crowd movements, and security measures that could explain how the shooter gained access. Mental health counselors offered continued support to victims' families and the local community, addressing trauma, grief, and anxiety from the violent event. Investigators reviewed past reports of similar crimes in the region to identify patterns, behaviors, or possible links to other unsolved cases nearby. By evening, law enforcement maintained a visible presence, reassured the public, and reinforced the importance of cooperation in providing credible information. Detectives conducted follow-up interviews with party attendees, confirming their movements, statements, and recollection of any unusual activity that night. Forensic teams revisited evidence, double-checking photographs, samples, and documentation to ensure nothing was overlooked during initial collection. Investigators analyzed the surrounding neighborhood for blind spots, escape routes, and areas where the suspect could have concealed themselves. Officers reviewed emergency response times, evaluating the efficiency of dispatch, arrival, and medical intervention during the critical early moments. Analysts cross-referenced ballistic evidence with regional firearms records to narrow down potential weapons and identify possible owners or suspects. Community meetings were held to inform residents, clarify safety protocols, and address fears while maintaining focus on the ongoing investigation. Law enforcement collaborated with digital forensics experts to examine phone activity, social media interactions, and online communications relevant to the case. Witnesses were revisited multiple times, allowing detectives to reconcile minor inconsistencies and strengthen the reliability of critical statements. Crime scene reconstruction specialists created detailed maps of bullet trajectories, victim locations, and shooter positioning for investigative and court purposes. By the close of the day, officials reinforced public safety measures while continuing to follow leads, knowing that the investigation was far from over. Early investigations revealed the shooter's path through the neighborhood, using surveillance and witness reports to map movements precisely. Officers coordinated with nearby jurisdictions to share intelligence on suspicious vehicles, individuals, and potential connections to other crimes in the region. Forensic teams meticulously analyzed ballistic trajectories, shell casings, and impact points to reconstruct the exact sequence of shots fired during the attack. Detectives interviewed local businesses, examining security camera footage for vehicles or individuals moving near the scene before and after the shooting. Analysts reviewed social media activity, messages, and posts from attendees to identify threats, conflicts, or unusual behavior that could suggest motives. Emergency responders shared observations, including the timing of their arrival, initial assessments, and the condition of victims upon reaching the scene. Investigators examined all points of entry, noting unlocked doors, open windows, or potential blind spots that may have facilitated the shooter's access. Neighborhood patrols were increased, ensuring visible law enforcement presence while officers gathered tips from residents who witnessed suspicious behavior. Digital forensics specialists cross-checked mobile phone records, GPS data, and social media locations to identify potential leads and corroborate statements. By late afternoon, a comprehensive timeline of the shooter's actions began to emerge. Though officials cautioned that the investigation remained ongoing, officers revisited statements from neighbors who reported hearing gunshots or unusual noises in the early hours, comparing timelines carefully. Investigators collected additional forensic samples, including trace evidence, fibers, and potential DNA that could identify the shooter conclusively. Analysts studied prior disputes among partygoers, looking for patterns of conflict, threats, or warning signs that might indicate a motive. For the attack, surveillance from public and private cameras was synchronized to verify witness accounts and ensure that no movement of interest was missed by investigators. Law enforcement established a centralized command center, coordinating teams, evidence collection, and communication with local media and public officials. Detectives examined the layout of the party area, mapping positions of victims, exits, and potential lines of sight to understand the shooter's approach. Investigators reviewed all digital communications, including emails, messages, and social media activity, for any evidence of premeditation or planning. Crime scene reconstruction specialists worked to recreate the events of the shooting in virtual models for clearer understanding and investigative purposes. Neighborhood outreach teams continued engaging the community, emphasizing safety, offering resources, and collecting tips from concerned residents and witnesses. By evening, detectives had compiled a detailed dossier of evidence, interviews, and timelines, forming the backbone of the ongoing criminal investigation. Officers compared witness statements from the party, cross-referencing details about movements, conversations, and potential suspicious behavior that night. Investigators examined the surrounding areas for hidden surveillance cameras, ensuring that every possible angle was reviewed for evidence of the shooter's path. Forensic teams analyzed bullet trajectories, impact marks, and shell casings to reconstruct the sequence of shots and determine the shooter's precise positioning. Detectives reviewed all emergency calls and 911 logs to verify response times and gather additional information from callers who reported the incident. Neighborhood canvassing continued, with officers revisiting residents and businesses to collect additional statements or any previously overlooked evidence. Analysts examined digital footprints, including mobile phone records, GPS data, and online activity, seeking clues about planning, coordination, or accomplices. Crime scene investigators documented every piece of evidence, from shell casings to fingerprints, ensuring nothing was misplaced or missed for analysis. Law enforcement coordinated with media outlets to inform the public, request tips, and encourage anyone with knowledge to come forward without delay. 49 community members were offered counseling and support as the impact of the violent event continued to resonate across the local neighborhoods. By the end of the day, investigators had created a preliminary report outlining timelines, evidence, and witness statements, guiding further action. Detectives reviewed prior criminal records and regional reports to identify any patterns or suspects that might be linked to the Stockton birthday party shooting. Investigators examined local traffic patterns and camera footage from nearby streets to track vehicles moving around the time of the incident. Forensic specialists processed collected evidence, including fingerprints, shell casings, and trace materials, to build a clearer profile of the shooter. Analysts compared social media interactions and messages between attendees to identify potential motives or warning signs that had been overlooked. Officers revisited the scene multiple times, checking for additional points of entry, escape routes, and evidence that could help reconstruct the event. Witnesses were re-interviewed to reconcile discrepancies, clarify timelines, and ensure all relevant details were accurately documented for the investigation. Law enforcement coordinated with federal agencies for specialized resources, advanced analytics, and cross-jurisdictional support in complex aspects of the case. Investigators mapped out a detailed chronology, combining eyewitness accounts, surveillance data, and forensic analysis to understand the shooter's movements. Community leaders were engaged to assist law enforcement in gathering tips, providing support, and maintaining calm while the investigation progressed. By late evening, the team had consolidated collected evidence, witness statements, and digital footprints into a central dossier to guide the next investigative steps. The investigation expanded to neighboring towns as law enforcement sought patterns, potential accomplices, and similar incidents across the region. Detectives examined public events and gatherings leading up to the birthday party to see if any conflicts or threats had been previously reported. Forensic analysts rechecked collected materials, ensuring all trace evidence, fibers, and DNA were accurately cataloged for cross-referencing later. Witnesses who left the party early were interviewed to determine if they noticed unusual behavior or anyone lingering suspiciously outside the main area. Officers coordinated with schools, local businesses, and community organizations to distribute information, ask for tips, and heighten situational awareness. Investigators cross-checked digital evidence, including phone data and social media posts, to identify timelines, interactions, or premeditated planning by the shooter. Neighborhood canvassing continued with officers revisiting homes near the incident, seeking overlooked details and ensuring no piece of evidence was missed. Analysts examined potential motives, looking at personal conflicts, threats, or prior confrontations that might have escalated to the violent act witnessed. Emergency response reports were reviewed in detail to confirm times, procedures, and any gaps that could inform improvements in future crisis management. By nightfall, investigators had consolidated findings from the day, creating a detailed action plan for the following phase of the ongoing criminal investigation. Investigators reviewed previous local incidents to identify patterns, links, or any suspect behavior that could connect to the Stockton party shooting. Forensic teams rechecked ballistic evidence, measuring angles and impact sites to reconstruct exactly how each shot was fired during the chaotic scene. Detectives analyzed surveillance footage from surrounding businesses and homes to track movements before, during, and after the birthday party. Social media messaging and online posts from the night were examined for clues about conflicts, threats, or any hint of premeditation by individuals present. Witnesses who left the party early were re-interviewed to determine whether they noticed suspicious activity or unusual behavior outside the main gathering. Officers coordinated with local schools, community centers, and neighborhood organizations to gather tips and heighten vigilance in the aftermath of the attack. Investigators mapped timelines combining witness reports, digital records, and forensic evidence to ensure every detail of the shooting sequence was understood clearly. Analysts focused on motives, assessing possible personal disputes, grudges, or prior threats that could explain the violence that erupted at the party. Emergency services and first responders were debriefed to confirm response times, evaluate procedures, and ensure the accuracy of all official reports for investigation. By late evening, detectives compiled a comprehensive report summarizing evidence, witness accounts, and digital findings to guide the next phase of action. Investigators returned to the surrounding streets, canvassing homes and businesses to gather overlooked evidence or witness accounts from the night. Forensic analysts re-examined shell casings, bullet trajectories, and gunshot residue to confirm the exact sequence of events at the birthday party location. Digital evidence teams reviewed phone records and GPS data to trace the movements of all attendees and identify potential suspects in the area. Officers conducted follow-up interviews with partygoers who may have initially withheld information, clarifying timelines and suspicious observations. Neighborhood surveillance footage was meticulously compared with witness accounts to determine inconsistencies and highlight key investigative leads. Law enforcement coordinated with local community centers and schools to distribute updates and collect additional tips from concerned residents. Analysts assessed possible motives, including prior disputes, threats, or personal conflicts that may have contributed to the violence that erupted suddenly. Witnesses who left the scene early were asked again about unusual behavior, unidentified individuals, or vehicles lingering near the party location. Emergency response logs were scrutinized for accuracy, ensuring that all first responders' actions and timelines were properly documented and verified. By nightfall, detectives compiled a detailed report combining physical evidence, digital findings, and witness statements to guide future investigative steps. Detectives revisited every lead received, separating credible tips from noise, ensuring the investigation remained focused on verifiable evidence alone. Forensic teams double-checked all collected materials, including fingerprints, clothing fibers, and shell casings, to avoid missing critical clues in the case. Digital analysts continued mapping phone activity, social media posts, and online interactions to uncover any connections to the shooter or suspicious individuals. Neighborhood residents were interviewed again to cross-check prior statements and gather additional insights about movements, vehicles, or people near the party. Surveillance footage from homes and businesses was synchronized with witness accounts to confirm the sequence of events and timing of each action. Law enforcement coordinated with regional crime databases to check for prior incidents or known suspects with similar behavioral patterns in the area. Investigators reviewed potential motives thoroughly, analyzing personal disputes, previous threats, and conflicts that could explain the sudden outbreak of violence. Officers confirmed emergency response procedures and response times, evaluating how interventions impacted the scene and identifying areas for improvement. Analysts continued constructing a timeline combining witness statements, physical evidence, and digital footprints to strengthen the overall case framework. By the end of the day, detectives consolidated all findings into a comprehensive report. Preparing for the next phase of targeted investigative actions, detectives reviewed all forensic evidence once again, ensuring that every shell casing, blood sample, and fiber was meticulously documented. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses to clarify any inconsistencies in their statements and to confirm the timeline of the shooting events. Digital teams analyzed mobile phone data and social media activity to identify connections between attendees and potential suspects involved. Officers revisited nearby streets and businesses, seeking overlooked clues such as unusual vehicles, footprints, or discarded items linked to the shooter. Surveillance cameras from surrounding homes were cross-referenced with witness statements to establish an accurate sequence of movements that night. Law enforcement collaborated with local and federal databases to check for prior criminal behavior or patterns matching the profile of the suspect. Analysts evaluated potential motives thoroughly, including past disputes, threats, and conflicts that may have led to the violent outbreak at the party. Emergency response procedures were reviewed to determine response efficiency, highlighting strengths and areas requiring procedural improvements. Investigators continued constructing a detailed timeline that combined witness accounts, forensic data, and digital evidence for accuracy and clarity. By the close of the day, detectives compiled a comprehensive investigative report summarizing all findings. Preparing for the next steps in the case, detectives revisited all previous leads, distinguishing credible information from irrelevant tips to maintain focus on actionable evidence alone. Forensic experts reanalyzed all collected evidence, including shell casings, fibers, and personal belongings, to ensure no critical clue was overlooked. Digital investigators continued tracking mobile phones, social media posts, and online interactions to identify potential links to the suspect. Neighborhood residents were interviewed again to verify prior statements and provide additional insights about suspicious activity near the party venue. Surveillance footage from homes and local businesses was synchronized with witness accounts to reconstruct a precise sequence of events at the scene. Law enforcement coordinated with regional databases to check for past criminal behavior or patterns similar to the Stockton shooting incident. Analysts examined possible motives carefully, reviewing personal disputes, threats, and conflicts that could have triggered the sudden outbreak of violence. Emergency response records were analyzed to assess response times, effectiveness of interventions, and opportunities to improve future protocols. Investigators continued refining a detailed timeline that combined witness statements, forensic evidence, and digital footprints for investigative clarity. By the end of the day, detectives consolidated findings into a structured report. Preparing the next phase of targeted investigative actions, detectives carefully re-examined every tip received, filtering out misinformation to focus on actionable leads and solid evidence alone. Forensic teams rechecked all collected materials, including shell casings, clothing fibers, and fingerprints to avoid missing critical details. Digital investigators continued analyzing phone records and social media activity to establish possible links between attendees and suspects. Officers revisited nearby streets and homes to uncover any overlooked clues, including unusual vehicles, suspicious individuals, or discarded items. Surveillance cameras from local residences were carefully compared with witness accounts to reconstruct the precise timeline of the shooting events. Law enforcement coordinated with regional and federal databases to verify prior incidents or patterns resembling the Stockton shooting scenario. Analysts evaluated potential motives comprehensively, reviewing past conflicts, personal threats, and disputes that could explain the sudden violence. Emergency response procedures were scrutinized to determine response efficiency, highlight strengths, and identify areas for procedural improvement. Investigators continued to build a comprehensive timeline combining witness statements, forensic evidence, and digital footprints for investigative clarity. At the conclusion of the day, detectives compiled a structured report summarizing findings, ensuring preparedness for the next phase of the case. Detectives reviewed all prior investigative steps, ensuring every piece of evidence, statement, and tip was fully accounted for before moving forward. Forensic teams conducted a final review of collected materials, verifying every shell casing, fiber, and fingerprint to eliminate potential oversights. Digital investigators completed their analysis of phone records and social media activity to identify any last possible connections to the suspect. Officers revisited the neighborhood and surrounding areas one final time to ensure no physical evidence or overlooked clues remained unexamined. Surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses was rechecked to confirm previous conclusions and to detect any missed movements or activity. Analysts cross-referenced all findings with regional and federal databases to verify if the suspect had a prior history or matched known patterns. Investigators carefully considered all possible motives, including past conflicts, personal threats, and other indicators that could explain the violent act. Emergency response records were re-evaluated to highlight response effectiveness and pinpoint areas where future procedures could be improved. A final timeline was constructed, combining witness statements, forensic evidence, and digital data to provide the most accurate reconstruction of events. With all data compiled and analyzed, detectives finalized the comprehensive investigative report, setting the stage for imminent follow-up actions.